Okay, let's start this one on the butterfly effect.
In 1952, an author named Ray Bradbury published a short story called A Sound of Thunder. In it, a hunter named Eccles pays $10,000 to travel with Time Safari, a time machine company that takes hunters back to the time of dinosaurs and allows them to hunt the T-Rex. The company guarantees nothing, neither your safety nor your return, and there are strict instructions and expectations for how the hunters should behave once they travel back in time. When they travel 60 million years back in time, they notice the path that has been laid by the company. It floats 6 inches above the Earth and is the only path that the hunter should travel upon. They cannot touch anything during their stay in the past, and they are only to shoot when told to. Interrupting any of the natural processes in the past could have irreparable repercussions for the future. Step on a mouse, and you leave your print, like the Grand Canyon, across eternity. They're very careful with leaving the past just as it was supposed to unfold. The T-Rex that they were supposed to kill was going to be crushed by a tree only seconds later. It was going to die anyway. Eccles, however, is terrified and runs back to the time machine through the jungle and waits for the others. But once the rest of the crew returns, they notice the mud on Eccles' boots. Against their better judgment, they allow him to return with the crew back to present day. When they exit the time machine, the crew checks in with the man behind the desk to see if everything is okay, and the man tells them it is. The man, however, is acting a bit different from before they left. There's a strange smell in the air. It's faint, but it's there. The sign on the wall is different. The words were spelled differently. Eccles sits down and checks every inch of his body for things he could have ruined. And on his boot, caked in the mud, he finds a butterfly. Beautiful and dead. The death of a single butterfly has somehow resulted in the future being changed. He cries out in disbelief, begging to return to the past and somehow undo what he's done.
You
He
can't,
sits down
buddy.
with his eyes closed and senses a crew member enter the room. The crew member breathes loudly and takes the safety off his rifle. Eccles opens his eyes, but suddenly, all he hears is a sound of thunder.
That was a very good summary of that story. I haven't read it in ages. Also, I really like that man's voice. Very soothing. Butterfly effect is just a bit of chaos theory, and I suppose it leads to a philosophical conversation as well. Can it be proven on a quantum level? Depends on the source you're reading, but the question is, if you can go back in time and make a seemingly insignificant change, how would that affect the present? So Eccles stepped on a butterfly, that affected his present. The same thing could be said for the present, though. If you make a change now, what implications would that have on the future? You can let me know. I remember speaking about this in a previous video, but I went the other way and got into the grandpa paradox, or the grandfather paradox, which is a more bizarre way to consider this question. But I do think sometimes people get caught up on the butterfly flapping its wings causing a hurricane statement. That's just a metaphor. Essentially saying that small things have non-linear impacts on complex systems. Hopefully he gets into that and explains it better than I just did. But I can't resist an existential conversation, so here we are. I don't know this channel, they're called
It used to be
Aperture.
thought that events that changed the world were things like big bombs, huge earthquakes, or other large-scale events. But it has now been realized that this is a very old-fashioned view held by people totally out of touch with modern thought. The things that change
Yes.
the world are the tiny things. A butterfly flapped its wings in the Amazon, and subsequently a storm ravages half of Europe. Paraphrased a little bit is a quote from a novel named Good Omens. What it's talking about is the butterfly effect. Sensitive dependence on initial conditions, more commonly known as the butterfly effect, is the idea that a small change in any situation could have huge implications later on down the road. The idea was coined by Edward Lorenz in the 1950s. Lorenz was a meteorologist who was searching for a means of predicting the weather. He was conducting experiments with various numbers to try and model a weather prediction. He did a previous experiment with an initial condition of 0.506127, 6 significant digits, a little bit overkill he thought, so this time his initial condition was only 0.506. 3 significant
Okay.
digits should be fine. So he left the room to get a cup of coffee and came back to something drastically different from what he had previously. At first things seemed normal and they seemed to follow the first experiment one to one, but after a while they started to diverge and looked like completely different models. A 0.03% difference in values had enormous long-term implications. It may seem insignificant, it's just a model, right? Well, Lorenz had actually just opened the door to a new way of thinking and seeing the world around us.
That's what I find fun about the butterfly effect. Something could seem insignificant, but it's hard to know whether it was or wasn't until later. And later's so vague, it's just a nondescript time in the future. I do think that some things are insignificant, though. Not everything has a meaningful and lasting impact. Yet, a conversation held in passing could have lifelong implications on a person. Or an event can mean nothing to you, but you might be witnessing somebody's villain origin story, or their positive catalyst. I suppose that leads to a question of determinism and free will. If you have a good video on free will that you want to share, please do it.
Chaos theory is the branch of mathematics that focuses on exactly this kind of thinking, but its name is kind of deceiving. The butterfly effect doesn't represent chaos, but rather the effects of changing the slightest conditions and then observing the results. Think of this. It is easier to predict the orbital period of a planet in another star system 10 million years from now than it is for us to predict our own weather here on Earth just a month from today. Because in order for us to predict the weather long term, we would have to know the exact position and momentum of every molecule of air on the planet and how they interact with each other. For planetary orbits, it's just a lot easier. There's a lot less variables. Any university physics student could probably calculate it.
Somebody confirm or deny that. I don't know.
As for the weather, a butterfly flapping its wings creates a minuscule and almost unnoticeable change in atmospheric pressure. But these changes compound over and over and over as time progresses, until, as widely known, the butterfly's wings cause a tornado in Texas. This inevitable growth of errors is called deterministic chaos, chaos that can be determined, measured. However, the butterfly itself cannot cause a tornado.
Okay.
The butterfly represents an unknowable quantity.
I'm glad he said
We
that.
can never reverse engineer an event to find out what exactly tipped the system. There's just too many factors that could have gone into it. No choice you've ever made has been an isolated event. It's like a domino effect that keeps compounding over time.
True.
The world and society is like a network, and when a certain part of that network fails, it affects everything else. Chaos theory isn't random, even though it seems like it. To prove it, let's play chaos game.
Okay.
Take a piece of paper and make 3 points like such.
I don't have paper.
We'll label them A, B, and C. Now, choose a random point in the middle of those 3 points. We'll just put it right here. Now, all you have to do is make a point halfway between your starting point and point A. From this point, make a point halfway between here and point B. Repeat the process for point C and continue this pattern, rotating between points A, B, and C. If you do this for long enough, you'll see something interesting start to happen. As more and more generations of these points are drawn, an image starts to emerge. From seemingly random points being drawn, from chaos, from disorder, this complex yet orderly figure shows its face. From drawing a few points and following certain rules, chaos can form order. It's a fractal, they're infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across any scale. This shows that, with enough time, random actions can have serious long-term effects. The butterfly effect isn't exactly how you'd expect science to be. Physics, math, and many other scientific fields are based on predictability. You know, predicting the orbit of planets in order to send satellites and probes there, or predicting the odds of an asteroid hitting the Earth. The butterfly effect is the complete opposite. It's a model that exposes the flaws in other models.
That was a bit of a metaphor for life, huh? Your choices might seem random, but they're all leading you somewhere. Where, I don't know, but, somewhere.
It says that without a perfect knowledge of initial conditions, any prediction is basically useless. But although the butterfly effect exposes flaws in other models, it also brings to light the impact that everything, including each of us, has. Jonas Salk is credited for having found the first vaccines for polio. Had he not discovered that at the time he did, the entire population of the planet today would be vastly different.
8
Some
billion.
people wouldn't have been born. Entire family lines may have been cut off due to the lack of a vaccine. Perhaps some of the largest companies today would not have been created if it weren't for this specific event happening at this specific time. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Russian nuclear-armed submarine was stationed off the coast of Cuba. American ships detected the submarine and began using depth charges to signal that the submarine should surface. The crew on board, though, took these depth charges to be bombs. The captain of the ship believed that war had broke out between the United States and the Soviet Union and ordered a nuclear torpedo to be sent immediately. Everyone agreed, except for one officer. Vasily Arkhipov. Without a unanimous vote, no action could be taken, and thus World War III was prevented. This one man's decision is the reason that the United States and Russia today aren't nuclear wastelands.
I didn't know that
The
story.
butterfly effect affects everything. You really have control of your life, like everything.
You can't.
No, but you and I have huge effects on the world as well.
Personal opinion. I don't think anyone means nothing, just your presence is something. Of course, for your friends and family, but then I think it ripples into everyone who has had contact with you. I'll specify and say meaningful contact. Your doctors, your teachers, the guy who sold you shoes. We'll take the doctor. You no longer exist, so you don't take up the 11:30 time slot at your doctor's office. So now she has a break from 11:30 to 2 instead of 12:30 to 2, which means that instead of going out to lunch and coming right back, she has time to go to the gym. At the gym, she's on the elliptical and she sees a man go into cardiac arrest. Yeah, we'll say cardiac arrest. And then she has a hand in saving him. So she changed her own life there, the life of the otherwise dead man, his pregnant wife, therefore his unborn child, and on and on. And then it's an onion, and you can go deeper and think of who else is affected. And that is an over-dramatized example, but just think of the possibilities on larger and smaller scales.
The butterfly effect is not to get leverage. It's not saying that every small thing always has a big impact.
Right, not
if that
everything.
were true, then in a way you could manipulate it. Think of it like Jenga. You take away a certain block and things can be just fine. But another block, that one special block, if removed, causes everything else to fall apart. The reality is you have no idea what thing, or what block, will change your future. So everything has a say in it. For example, you watching this video will take up about 10 minutes of your day, whether it's for a good reason or not. Could me watching a movie, or listening to a song, getting a video idea from it, researching it, writing it, editing it, and uploading it to where you see it on your YouTube feed at a specific time prevent something bad from happening to you? Maybe
Could do.
watching this video prevented you from going to the store 10 minutes early, where if you had left 10 minutes ago, a car that runs a red light would smash into you in an intersection, killing you. It's a scary thought, but it's a possibility. Someone recently messaged me and said that they had saw someone watching one of my videos in their classroom right next to them. They started to talk, become friends, and now they're dating. If YouTube
Aw.
wasn't a platform, if I hadn't had that specific video idea, that wouldn't have happened, and maybe
That's
those
cute.
two people would have never met. But it goes much further than that. Everything has led you and I to this very moment. Literally everything. Because the universe exists, because the universe is expanding, and because the temperature of the universe was just right to the point that stellar nurseries can form stars, without those stars, we wouldn't have supernovas. Without supernovas, we wouldn't have iron. Without iron, we couldn't exist. Every day you breathe, I hope, and when you exhale carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide, through the help of plants and photosynthesis, creates more oxygen. Oxygen that people hundreds of years from now might breathe. Everything you do, no matter how small it is, will change the future in one way or another. People who lived hundreds of years ago have had an effect on the world as it is today. The things you do today will ripple throughout time. The small things you create today can be the big things that the next generation builds upon. In a way, you can live forever. So the next time something big happens in your life, just think, it didn't happen by accident.
That was a cool video. It was a bit heartwarming at the end. I hope I help you find your spouse. If you're familiar with this channel and want to recommend any other videos of theirs, let me know the title down below. But the whole thing made me think of a personal anecdote. There's a quote that I've been carrying around with me for years, in my head, but also on the notes app on my phone. And I tend to recite it whenever a door is closing. So whether I'm moving, which I do a lot, or something that I wished would last longer is ending, or someone is leaving, pretty much anytime I'm moving on from something. It's by T.S. Eliot, an excerpt from his poem called Ash Wednesday, and it goes like this. Time is always time, and place is always and only place. So what is actual only for one time, and only for one place. So that might mean nothing to you, but I heard it in a moment in my life when I really needed that perspective. And it was told to me by somebody that I only spent one afternoon with. And now thinking back, so many factors had to line up for that conversation to even happen. At the time, we were living in the same city, but the next day, he was moving to London. And I was heavily considering moving to another city across the country that we were living in. Anyway, when he quoted T.S. Eliot, it struck me for some reason and I wrote it down. But I was this close to not meeting him at that cafe that day. And now, I don't even remember what he looks like. I remember his name, but not his surname, and he had a very common name, so it would be hard for me to find him just from that. I don't know what became of him, we never spoke again. And he probably has no clue that he told me something that I still think about years later, and where I was maybe on the fence about moving to that next city. I think that quote probably helped shape my decision. It reminds me to keep things moving and try not to recreate past times and places. Maybe it's something like the Heraclitus quote that a man can't step into the same river twice because it's not the same river and he's not the same man. I'm paraphrasing there, but same energy. But I like to think that guy was put in my path to give me those words. Now, would I have read it anyway? I don't know. I don't typically read T.S. Eliot. In fact, before reading that poem, I didn't ever read T.S. Eliot, and I don't gravitate towards poetry in general. So I wonder what would have happened if I didn't meet him for coffee that day. Or if he ended up moving a week before. Or if I ended up leaving that city a month prior like I initially planned to. What if we never spoke? What if he didn't learn English 2 years prior to that conversation? Or what if T.S. Eliot remained a banker and never became a writer? Maybe I wouldn't have the same perspective on certain events and I would have made different choices, which wouldn't have led me eventually across the world from that moment, looking in front of the camera and talking to you. But it's just a good example of how sometimes we don't know the impact that we have on others, or how far the ripples go. Anyway, literary recommendation. We'll just go with Ray Bradbury's Sound of Thunder, because it goes with the theme, but also, for me, Ray Bradbury is a must-read author. If you haven't read Fahrenheit 451, I would argue that that's his most famous book. If you're into dystopian novels, that one's for you. I'll link both titles in the bio. I'll look for both free audiobook versions. And let me know what you think about butterfly effect, chaos theory, something that someone said to you that impacted your life. That's all I've got for you. Thanks for watching with me, and I'll catch you next time.